night as well. I had to cancel that one, so I haven't gone on a show in a couple of weeks. So
okay, well, we'll put you to the test.
Absolutely. Hopefully, I still remember what to do. Looks like we're live streaming everywhere, which is great. Looks like we are recording. So I'm very, very happy. Okay. Well, welcome back to the Coaches to the Moon podcast, ladies and gentlemen. I'm here today with Nicole Davidson. She's a negotiation consultant, which I'm really keen to dig into. She's got over 20 years of experience in commercial conflict and negotiation work. She's also the host of the Negotiation in Real Life podcast and mum to 3 beautiful young whippersnappers. Nicole, thank you so much for being here today.
Absolute pleasure, Alex.
Excellent. So we brought you on today to talk to you about negotiation for coaches. I came on your podcast where I talked about negotiation in kind of a sales sense, but I'd love to get from you a quick rundown of what the term negotiation means to you.
Yeah, it's a really good question, because I think what's really interesting is often people don't realize they're in a negotiation. And I had a great example of that just last night, where I was talking to some people about potentially doing a masterclass at a conference I was running, and they got in contact. We talked about how it might work, and I sort of had a discussion to say, well, look, what they were offering really didn't make sense to me, and here are all the reasons why. And we came up with an alternative. So instead of doing a masterclass, I'm going to run a session at the conference. And at the end, I said to them, it was a great negotiation. And they went, what? And they went, oh yeah, we were just negotiating, weren't we? And for me, negotiation is any time you are communicating with somebody and you're trying to achieve outcomes. And those outcomes may be mutually exclusive, or they may be things that work really well together. Often we think it's only where we're negotiating and what we both want doesn't go together, that they're mutually exclusive. And we think that's a negotiation. We've got to sort of split this pie of fixed resources. But it really is any time you go into a conversation with somebody else and you're both trying to achieve outcomes. So it's a pretty broad concept.
That's a really good description of it and a good example. I suppose, yeah, in life, we probably get a lot of our perception of negotiation from these law dramas on TV where they rock in and they completely slaughter the person with some line and then turn and walk out. And every conversation they have is the most conflict that, any of us would ever experience. And it's all they seem to do. And they just crush it with their nice hair.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're very polished suits as well. I mean, I grew up on negotiation in the LA law sense. That shows my age.
Yeah.
But absolutely, I think so many people come away with negotiation as this sort of really hostile, combative process.
Yeah.
And that's just one way of negotiating.
Yes, 100%. And then there's, I guess it comes down to everyday life as well. Simple as what do you want for dinner, or talking to your kids, or even negotiating with yourself to get out of bed to go to the gym rather than work.
Absolutely. Those internal negotiations are often the hardest.
I think that's very true. I'm very aware, by the way, that we pronounce negotiation differently. I thought of changing the way I say it, but I'm not going to. I don't think I'll pull it off very well. So
we all know what we're talking about.
100% we do. And that is life. It's not all about compromise. It's about win-win. So, I want to get into some tangible coaching stuff first, but just in terms of what you do, for some context, negotiation consultant under your own practice now, but in the past you've worked with some big companies. What was your role for these big companies day to day?
So my role before I worked for myself, probably where I did the most negotiation, well, there's been a few things. So I've had quite a varied career. I worked in the insolvency space for about 8 or 9 years. And so in terms of negotiations there, the biggest ones, I guess, were negotiating with creditors of companies that had gone broke, trying to work out how to keep them happy. Often there wasn't a lot of flexibility in those negotiations, but there was also negotiations with staff who might be wanting to keep on in the administration for a period. There were negotiations with my staff about, job roles and how we managed all of the work that needed to be done. A lot of the negotiations with external parties were quite aggressive and combative because negotiation is a hard area to find a win-win outcome in. I also got involved in negotiation because I spent close to 2 years as a recruitment consultant. So there, once again, I had, negotiations with the clients. What were our fees going to be? How do we determine what the scope of our work was going to look like? And then negotiation with candidates as well. And in some ways, I was the middleman there, as I am now when I'm a commercial mediator.
Yeah, and so commercial mediation, pretty much you're, the person in the middle holding the two heads apart, stopping people from completely going at it, making sure there's a good outcome for everyone. What was it that made you think, hey, I'm really good at this. I'm going to focus on this specific aspect of negotiation as my career?
So for me, the interesting thing was, I guess, before I was even doing insolvency, I qualified as a lawyer. And so I had a background in the law. I found litigation as a method of resolving disputes to be particularly unnecessarily complicated in a lot of cases, very slow, very time consuming. So I'd never really got into that side of things. But once I started getting into negotiation, and I came into negotiation as a trainer. So I've been teaching generalist skills around communication, presentation, all of these things, and then moved into an organisation where I really got to dive deep into the theory of negotiation and how it works and how to apply it. And that was when I realised that there was this whole skill set that if we applied it to business disputes would have a far greater impact than litigation might do and would help people get those disputes resolved quickly and easily. So it was really seeing that then made me go, well, as much as I love the teaching and training of negotiation, and it's still part of what I do, the best way for me to put that into practice in a way that was going to have maximum results for others was to step in as a mediator, because, I think one of the things is we all negotiate all the time, but very few of us have ever been taught how to do that effectively. And so bringing someone into a negotiation to help facilitate that by bringing the negotiation skills to the conversation has a really big impact. And that's why I moved into that field and why I love it so much.
I can tell you love it. That's fantastic. It's a topic that I wouldn't have even thought about as a potential branch of, a career or life. And you seem to absolutely love it, which is great. I wanted to just, dig into your skills a little bit more. Can you tell us about the biggest deal you've ever saved with some savvy negotiation?
Oh, that's a good question. That's a really good question, Alex. So, look, I'm not sure. Some of the deals that I think I've been able to add the most value haven't necessarily been the biggest ones, but they're the ones where the parties themselves are really struggling with the whole process. And they tend to be the ones where there's a lot of anxiety and hostility that are in there. So I can think of a couple of examples. One of the ones I guess that stands out for me is a contractual dispute. It was between a call centre and the user of a call centre. And they had a contract between them. There was a dispute about money that was to be owed to the call centre provider under that contract. That dispute was worth about $600,000 or $700,000. So big, but not massive depending on the scale that you're working to, but significant amount. The parties were located around the world. So they were all in different spots. The call centre was in Africa. There were also people in Europe that were involved in this dispute. Now, if this had gone to litigation, between the parties, they estimated that it would have cost around $300,000 in legal fees to go through the litigation process. Now, $300,000 for a debt of $600,000 to $700,000, massive. We were able to bring people together remotely at this point. So we did it all via Zoom. So there were no travel costs. There was no lost time. We did have to shuffle it around to manage all the different time zones. But we, in 2 half-day sessions, were able to resolve that dispute for them. And my cost was less than $10,000.
Yeah.
So, you think about 10,000 versus 300. And, once again, how did we resolve it? It was because the parties hadn't actually, once they got into a dispute, they basically stopped talking to each other. And the process that I used brought them back to really clarify what were the key issues that they didn't agree on. So, I worked through the process. What do we agree on as fact? What do we disagree on? We get the lawyers involved. Where is the disagreement there? And once you narrow down those issues, it becomes much easier to then get to a resolution.
Great. That's fantastic. That's fantastic. And you're managing to, and you're managing to handle negotiations remotely and virtually pretty well?
Yeah, look, once again, if you'd asked me a couple of years ago, could I do what I do online? I'd have said, no, it needs that personal touch. I think over the last couple of years, and I've done close to 100 mediations online now since COVID started, it's about how you use the technology. And, while there are some negatives and certainly what I lose and what the parties to the negotiation lose is the inability to have some of the sort of side conversations that you might have in a negotiation. So sometimes the action happens away from the negotiation table. Parties are all stopping and taking a break and having coffee or morning tea. And, there's those incidental conversations that are the things that move things forward. So you lose that. But equally, I find that when you put people into their own environment, they're sitting in their own home or their own office, they're comfortable, they tend to be a bit more relaxed. So there's a benefit of that remote side of things as well. So, I think it's like everything. It's not all bad and it's not all good. There's, just differences between the two options.
That's super true though, isn't it? About being in your own environment, feeling more comfortable. I'm not great in medical establishments. I just kind of freeze up a little bit. And since we've had the babies, we had to go to the doctors in the hospital all the time. But then for the last, often if we have to go to like one of the big children's hospitals for checkups and stuff, and they didn't shut them down, but they're like, if it's not essential, don't come because there's like 10,000 people here a day, you're going to get COVID. We did them all, online like this, consultations with doctors and that sort of thing. And goodness me, I'm joking around with them, I can just act completely differently. And so that is a super interesting factor that you just mentioned there. So, Nicole, what I really wanted to go into today was this. It's the delivery side of coaching that I feel falls by the wayside a bit, because on this podcast, we talk about the business of coaching, and most marketing and most business around this coaching industry is how to get more leads, how to get more sales, how to make more money, how to leverage it so you don't have to do as much. But the actual delivery to your clients is where most people slip up. And that's why we have so many, bad coaches out there and so many bad experiences from clients and customers. And we've all had a client who just doesn't work out. Perhaps they've had a change in their circumstances, or perhaps they had the wrong expectations going in. And I know this one's happened to me, is when you're just so keen for the sale, you bring on someone knowing they're not quite right for your program, and then the relationship sours. So a lot of less experienced coaches out there maybe get pretty blindsided when they have a customer or a client with negative feedback. And so what I'd love for you to help us out with today is to kind of break down a few steps of dealing with a negative client relationship, starting with that initial complaint.
Yeah, fantastic. So, look, I think there's lots to be unpacked in that side of things. The first thing I think is the impact of that complaint itself on the coach. And, what we know is that the minute you get a complaint in, whether it's a verbal complaint from a client or whether they've sent you an email or potentially it's already a bad review on Google, what that does is it can trigger a stress response in the body, because this is bad. This is a threat to our sense of being. It's a threat to our sense of professionalism. And what that means is when we get these threat responses, it sort of releases cortisol into the body, it releases adrenaline into the body, and it actually means that sometimes we don't respond to things rationally, because the cortisol and adrenaline puts us into that sort of fight or flight mode, where we are acting on instinct rather than looking at what's the rational thing to do. It actually shuts down the neocortex thinking part of our brain. So I think the very first thing to realise when you get those complaints or get a complaint is that the potentially going to happen. And you just need to pause. You know, you need to just take that little break so that you're actually not just reacting to what's going on, but you're actually thinking about it and being strategic. So that's step number one. Step number two is the next step you really want to do is actually understand more about that complaint. I think so often what happens is we get a complaint from a client. It might be fairly brief and it might be very top level. So it's kind of, okay, I'm unhappy, but they might not explain exactly what's going on. And so, you know, I think the challenge is to not necessarily accept that the client's right when they complain, but to really be prepared to ask questions and listen to them to understand what their perspective is. So, and, you know, I think the word that you used before around expectations is critical. So the negotiations that you have before you even start delivering the service become really important, because that's where the expectations are set. But once we get to this complaint, it's really about letting that person explain exactly why they're upset and asking deep questions. So keeping asking, you know, I talk about using the 5 whys technique, where each time it's like, well, why was that a problem for you? Help me explain why that was a problem, and really getting down to what their core concerns are that have been brought up in this complaint.
Yeah. Wow. Before we go into step 1 through 11, let's unpack steps 1 and 2.
Yeah.
So the gut punch that you get when you get the text or the email that, you know, suddenly they want to pull out or they want a refund or they're unhappy, because we are generally in the coaching industry, we are the business, we are the brand. It is a personal attack on us, even though it's not meant to be. We take it as a personal attack.
Yeah.
So really, really important to try and approach it logically. Easier said than done, but I suppose that approaching it logically would probably come with just a sense of security in what you do. Or is there any other way that you think that's you can be more logical about a complaint?
Look, I think, yes, having comfort in what you do is important, but it's also important. I always say you've got to go into any conflict with at least a 0.1% chance that you have made a mistake or that you're wrong. And the reason that's important is because where we tend to go is into self-defense mode once that complaint is there. And so, you know, typically what will happen is somebody will respond to the complaint by telling the other person exactly why their complaint is unjustified.
Yeah.
So they'll give them all the reasons why what they did was the right thing. And, you know, it could be a whole range of different things, but all they're doing is actually speaking at the person who's complained to basically tell them that they're wrong. And what you do is, excuse me, you set yourself up for this battle of right and wrong. You know, so it becomes quite combative, because if what they're saying is true, then what I'm saying must be wrong, and I can't be wrong, so I need to fight, and they're fighting back. And what tends to then happen is you both stop listening to each other. You're so busy putting your own case forward that you're not listening to the others. Now, that's why step 2, that idea about understanding exactly what the complaint is and digging down and asking good questions, is so important, because during that phase, you're actually listening to the client. And of course, that is harder than it sounds sometimes as well. You think listening was easy, but it's one of the hardest things we do. But you've got to actually really deeply listen, not just for what they're saying, but also for what they're not saying. You know, what is the underlying theme? What's going on that's making them say these things, so you can understand exactly where they're coming from.
Yeah.
And the hope is, and what will happen in most cases, is once that you've given them that gift of listening to them, they will return the favour and allow you then to talk and be listening properly to you, rather than listening to tell you why you're wrong.
Yeah, very important. Do you think that when there is a complaint and there's a conversation going over text or email, it is important to get on the phone as soon as possible?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the reason for that, I mean, there's a few. I mean, interpersonal contact, I think, is always better. But the main reason for that is that it is really easy to misinterpret something that's in writing. And when you think about communication, whatever is the message that's in my head that I want to convey to you, I will send that using my words. There'll be tone of voice and there'll be body language. Now, when we read something, there's no tone of voice. But because of the way our brains work, we actually effectively read out loud in our head. And so our brain infers a tone of voice in what we're reading. Now, here's the challenge. If I'm in conflict with someone, there's a complaint, there's now a damage to the relationship, my brain is much more likely to infer some kind of negative tone of voice than it is a positive. So I'm not going to give them the benefit of the doubt that they said that thing and it had a good intention. I'm going to go, they absolutely meant to crucify me with that.
That is so funny. That is so true. Oh my goodness. When you're listening to your partner complain about a day at work, and the voice they do of their boss is never, and then she said this. It's like, and then she goes, Nima, 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 and she puts a voice on for them because of her perception of her in that moment. That is so funny.
But it's even if you think about a friend and, maybe you've just had an argument with this friend.
Yep.
And you send an email to them saying, have you booked the restaurant for next week? And you get a text message back and all it says is no.
Yeah.
But if you've just had an argument with that friend, it's more likely to be no, as if to say, stop hassling me, I'll get round to it, and don't need you following me up. If you haven't, it's more likely just to be a no.
Yeah.
There's no tone, there's no anything in it. So I think this happens to us all the time.
Yes. Yeah, it does. And some people just don't punctuate very well, do they? Some people.
True.
My father-in-law is German, and he's a businessman, and he runs this company. He's a managing director of a company, and he says that he works in the Australian office, but the head office is in Germany, and apparently a lot of the Australian staff, often when they first start working there, they think that the German staff are really negative because they're so straightforward. There's no hope this finds you well. There's no nice weather we're having. It's just, here's the job, get it done by Friday, bye. In a completely friendly way. But it is because it's written down, there's no nuance and people just assume the worst. So, okay, fantastic. So we've gotten to the point where we've accepted there's a chance we may be wrong. However, the client's angry. We have managed to compose our emotions, and now we're having a chat with the client where we've asked them questions as to why they feel this way.
Yeah.
We've gotten to the root of the issue. They're still angry, and now there's an issue of money. They want their money back, or they want to get out of the contract, and we don't want to do that. How do we move forwards?
So look, this is where in that conversation that you're having, what you want to be doing is uncovering really what's important to them. Now, in some cases, just digging down and understanding, actually really well, listening to them well and getting some sort of problems, getting to the root of what their problems are, that may be enough to get rid of their anger completely. Sometimes and often these conflicts arise because of poor communication in the lead up to the problem. And if communication had been better, we'd never have got ourselves into a conflict situation in the first place. So sometimes just having that complete understanding of where they're coming from and why they're upset, and sometimes we might need to make an apology, or there might be something that we can quickly and easily do to get back into their good books and the problem goes away. Where there is still a problem, and in a case where you're talking about, a client wanting to get out of a contract and stop services without paying anything else, you end up then in a negotiation. Now we understand what the problem is. We've got to move into negotiation territory to figure out, well, what's the best way for both of us to resolve this? Because, if you think typically you've got a case where maybe you've got a retainer with the client, they want to terminate. You could rely on the contract and say, well, I don't care, you've signed up to this, I'm going to sue you if you don't pay me. And of course, what that will do for your reputation and, Google reviews or whatever they might be doing is not going to be good for you. So it's really coming down then to understand what's important to both parties to get a resolution. And, for the client, they'll have their own things that are really important. Maybe it's that their priorities have changed and this is no longer the best thing for them to be doing. Maybe that they've run out of money, they can't afford it anymore. Maybe they just feel they're not getting the results that they deserve. And I think that's where the conversation is really important, because clients may come to you going, "Oh, you're just not doing what I expected." But ultimately that might not be the real reason that they're unhappy. It might be something completely different going on in the background. So understanding what those real reasons are allow you to then be a bit creative about solutions, because if you find that there's a problem with the service delivery, you're going to have a very different negotiation to if it's a financial issue and they don't see the value in what they're getting.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, isn't it? That happened to me a few times in my nutrition health coaching business back in the day. And just there was I had relatively low ticket product, and people were paying like $68 a week, that sort of thing, for this online group coaching thing. And often I would get people, not often, but sometimes you get people saying, "Hi Alex, I've lost my job or whatever, and I need to terminate the contract or whatever." And it's fine with one person, but when maybe you've got, a few people make a similar excuse or something like that and want to pull out, and suddenly your income drops by 30% because you just said yes to everyone, that can be a bit of an issue. And so you've delivered your service properly. The person has signed a contract, however, their circumstances change. And the way I always used to look at it was like, you wouldn't just text Optus and say, "I can't pay my phone bill this week. Why are you texting me? Let's work through it together." So, and I know I'm just asking you straight up specific questions. You've got a client who is fine with what you do, but runs out of money and can't pay you. They're on a contract. You're relying on that income. Where do we start?
Look, it's a really good question. And I have to say there's no easy answers, because the first thing I want to do is talk to that person and find out, is it that they've legitimately run out of money? If that's the case, then is there something creative that you can do to get some value from them if it's not money that you're getting? So if this person really has been happy with service, they've found benefit from it, but they can no longer afford to keep going, what can they do for you that might be helpful if you have to give up that money? Because, you've got a choice. You could rely on it and force them to pay money that they can't afford, which probably means they'll be going around saying negative things about you. But what about if they actually became your spokesperson? What if they're actually somebody who agrees to put really positive posts out on social media for your behalf and starts to advocate for you, or someone who brings in some new business? Okay, well, you can't afford to. That's great. We'd love to have you back when you can. If you're able to bring us some new people, we can talk about the fee reduction, or, there's ways that you can then be a little bit creative, because you've got to be really clear about what is important to you as the coach. And yes, money is important. Money is almost always important in a negotiation, but your reputation, your ability to bring in new clients, your sense of respect, all of these are important as well. So you've got different interests to play with that you can meet in the negotiation to try and get an outcome. And, once again, I always say you're not always going to get a great outcome in a negotiation, but you want to get the best possible. And, the challenge here is, if you can't negotiate something with this client who's come to you saying they want to leave, they can't afford it, what they're likely to do is just walk off anyway, cancel their direct debit, and you'll never see or hear from them again. And they'll possibly go and say some pretty negative things about you out in the marketplace. So even if you can get something that's better than that, it's not necessarily going to be all the money you wanted, but if you can get something that's more valuable than that, then you've got a good outcome in the negotiation.
That's true. Yeah, you do see unhappy clients or anxious clients just go radio silence every now and then. And there's nothing you can do. You can contact them in as many ways as possible, but they block your number. So what you're saying is that the worst possible outcome, may be they leave, they're unhappy, and you get no money out of it anyway. So you may as well do your best to help everyone just be better than that outcome, which
yeah,
is...
well, I think going a step further, the worst outcome is that they leave, you get no money, and they're saying bad things about you. So even if you can get them to leave and see no money, but you've protected your reputation, that's already one step forward.
Yes.
So, and look, I think I had a really good idea just a second ago, and it's just blown out of my mind, but it'll probably come back.
Yeah, great. Yeah, that's fantastic. It's a really funny journey. It's a really funny journey, the coaching process, because you may be an expert in what you do, as in you're really, really good at bodybuilding. So you decide to start teaching people how to bodybuild, but then suddenly you find yourself dealing with all these different people, and maybe you don't work at the gym anymore, where you've got the gym to protect you. You now work for yourself online, and suddenly all these different personalities, and then you have to deal with money and contracts, and the whole thing can just really come at you out of nowhere because you're not prepared or equipped for this. Yeah. You're good at lifting weights and eating right. And so
it's the other thing I was going to say before, actually, it's just come back to me. I think when you're in that coach position and you're dealing with this difficult client who wants to cancel, I think you've also got to put yourself, think about things where you've been in the client position. And I wonder whether some of these coaches who are complaining about clients changing their mind and wanting to get out have ever done that themselves with a service that they've signed up to. And I think we've just all got to remember to be human in these situations and understand where people are coming from.
Yeah.
I think that goes a long way.
Yeah, 100%. We've all done that, right? We've all done that. And for me, because I've been on the sales side of it, I know that if I've ever signed up to a program and then decide I don't want to do it, I'm just going to say, thanks, it's been real, pay myself out, keep paying it, and then just accept it, because that's me. I like to take responsibility for things. However, that's only because I've been on the sales side of it, and I know that the alternative is no fun for anyone. So I made my bed, lie in it. And I think part of the coaching process is being able to take accountability for stuff and mistakes, that sort of thing, right? So the last thing I really wanted to ask you was, going into your own, business and your own experience of negotiation, working with clients, is there anything about negotiation you know now that you wish you'd known when you first started running your own business?
Look, I guess when I started running my business, I was already in the negotiation space, so I've had the advantage of that. But when I think back to earlier in my career, and particularly when I was working in the insolvency side of things, I think the confidence to know that negotiation doesn't have to be a scary thing. I think a lot of us have this sort of negative connotation of negotiation, or maybe we don't have a negative connotation. Some people, you ask some people, and interestingly, there's a gender difference here as well. So there was some research done, and typically women would describe negotiation as something like going to the dentist. Not a particularly fun thing, whereas men would look at it more like it's a competition. And I think, coming in knowing that that is actually an opportunity to work with the other person to get the best outcome between you and to be a bit more collaborative. I think that's a really important thing. And, particularly as you said, we all sort of get brainwashed into what negotiation is through our experiences of Hollywood movies and TV shows. And knowing that it doesn't have to be like that, and that's not what negotiation is really important. I think the other really big thing is just knowing that the best thing that you can do in a negotiation is bring a mindset of curiosity, which leads you to ask lots of questions of the other side to really understand where they're coming from, and then being a really good listener to actually get the value out of the answers that they give you.
Fantastic advice, Nicole. Fantastic advice all around. And I wish I'd had your knowledge from today 6 years ago when I first started taking on my own clients, but we live and learn. It's
never too late to learn.
Never too late. Oh, we're learning every day. We're learning every day.
And look, I still learn about negotiation. I've been working in this space for 10 years, and I still learn because everybody is different. Every situation is different. And, you know, it's interesting. There's one author, Michael Wheeler, who wrote a book, and I love his analogy. He says negotiation is like jazz. It's like, you know, improvised jazz, where you've got to have all the skills. You've got to know absolutely, you know, if you're the jazz musician, you've got to know how to play your instrument. You've got to know all of the technique and the theory. But in any given moment, you've got to adapt to what's going on around you. And that's a bit like negotiation. So you practice all of those individual skills, the questioning, the listening, the analysis, but then you've got to be completely flexible in the moment. And that's where I think, you know, I encourage anyone who's doing this to take more time to reflect after they've had a negotiation. You know, what did I do then that worked well? What could I do differently? And also get some support, you know, particularly the bigger the negotiation, get someone else involved, because we also get hung up by our own biases and our own kind of subconscious distractions. And a third-party perspective adds a lot of value in a big negotiation.
100%. No, third party perspective in so many things, where it allows a neutral party to come in and look, just like when you've been looking at a crossword puzzle forever and it's all blurry, and then one person comes and gets it straight away. It's just because they're not so deep in it, right? Yeah. So did you have any resources available that people can come and grab to get some skills?
Yeah, absolutely. So if people head to my website, which is nicoledavidsonnegotiation.com.au, there's a template there which is to help you prepare for a negotiation. There's also a blog on there with a whole bunch of different articles. There's my podcast, Negotiation in Real Life podcast, where I talk to people about their real life experiences in negotiation. And there's also, I've got a book available on Amazon, which is called Negotiation from A to Z, where did I say that? A to Z, 26 tips to improve every negotiation. So that's available on Amazon.
Love it. And the Hollywood movie influence continues, right?
Indeed.
Americanizing even our alphabet these days.
I think it's because I was just talking to somebody before this call whose name was Zed.
Oh, right. How funny
Unusual,
is that?
But there you go.
There you go. That's so great. Well, we'll definitely be plugging those resources in all the clips we released from this episode. And yeah, I can't wait to get that template as well. That sounds really fun. So Nicole Davidson, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
It has been an absolute pleasure and lovely to speak with you again, Alex.
Great. Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully not for the last time. Well, for anyone listening or watching live, thank you so much. We'll be back in a few days' time with another episode of Coaches to the Moon. Until then, thank you so much for listening.